We're going to conclude our series discussing tips on riding in various situations this week and talk about what to do when the road surface is less than ideal. You know, sometimes bad road surfaces are predictable and we can plan for them, like in rain. Sometimes they're not predictable and can even catch us off guard, like gravel or oil spills on the road. There are some tips that we can do to make the situation better, and there are some things that we can do to make the situation a whole lot worse. The problem with the things that can make the situation worse is that our reaction to the situation is often an instinct. So we have to learn to overcome the way we react to certain situations through the knowledge we gain from videos like this and by training. You know, there's an interesting aspect of training that I rarely see discussed. Let's say you practice emergency braking, swerving, and brake on escape on a regular basis. But one day you're out for a ride and you experience something unexpected. You know, maybe you come up on a situation and there's oil all over the road. Well, you haven't trained for oil all over the road. I don't know a single class that teaches you how to deal with that. Well, does that mean that there's no hope to save the situation and all of your training is useless and has no effect on your ability to stay upright? Well, depending on how bad the situation is, you may be able to save the situation, or it may be so bad that there's no saving at all. But the training you have done in other skills, like emergency braking or swerving, often translates to the current problem, even though it's a different problem, and you're in a better position to stay upright or lessen the impact of the crash. So let me tell a story from 10 to 15 years ago that when I used to commute back and forth to the airline that I worked at. Back then I rode rain or shine, heat or cold. In the summer of Texas, I did that through the hottest days of summer, and it gets relatively cold here in North Texas in the winter. And as long as the roads were free of snow and ice, I had heated gear that I'd put on, and I rode. So one morning, the night before, it had gotten down in the teens, the low teens, which is kind of cold here for North Texas. But there had been no precipitation for a long time, so the road should have been in very good condition. I got on the Honda Valkyrie, I think it was a motorcycle I was riding at the time, plugged in my heated gear, had a heated jacket liner, heated gloves, full lowers with boots on, so I stayed pretty well protected and warm on the motorcycle, and I headed out for work. So I was leaving for work. The sun had just barely come up, was barely kind of peeking over the horizon. I was entering onto the highway. I was on an entrance ramp in a construction area. In that construction area and right next to that entrance ramp was a line of porta potties for the construction crew. And overnight, somebody had come over and knocked every one of those porta potties over. That created this flow of fluid coming out onto the entrance ramp that created about a 40-foot long sheet of black ice, that covered that entrance ramp. And it was right at the point where you're turning to merge onto the highway. So there's a slight lean, but you're accelerating to get up to highway speed. I was looking forward and really didn't see anything on the road. It was practically invisible until I got right on top of it. And then I could see a little bit of glisten on the pavement. It started coming up from the pavement and the sun that was, just coming over the horizon. But the first thing I really noticed was the rear tire wanting to kick out because I was on the throttle and I was accelerating to get on the highway. Well, I saw the ice at that point. I squeezed in the clutch and I rolled off the throttle. And I was just hoping that the motorcycle would straighten back up, which it did. So I'm just kind of coasting. I'm at about 45, maybe 50 miles per hour. I'm coasting on what the sheet of ice, black ice across the highway, and the ramp was kind of slanted down to the right, and I could feel the back tire once again start slipping out, and I could see ahead where the dry pavement was. I had an F-150 behind me, so I was just trying to stay calm and ride this thing out. I could feel the rear tires slipping out, had the clutch squeezed in, no throttle, not using the brakes at all. And by the time I got to the other side of it, the bike was just a little bit out of alignment, but not enough to cause a high side, because when it hit the dry pavement, I heard a little bit of chirp as the bike came back into alignment, felt a little bit of bump on my rear end as the bike straightened back up, and then I continued on my way. Thankfully not crashing, and especially not crashing in front of the F-150 that was also accelerating to get on the highway. So the three things that I told myself when I got in that situation is look ahead. Don't look down, look ahead. That's your best way to keep your balance. Look where you want the motorcycle to go. I remember consciously telling myself, relax. So I relaxed on the handlebars. I was going to let the bike move around, and I was going to let it do what it needed to do to try to find traction. And I remember telling myself specifically, remove power. So I rolled off the throttle. I squeezed in the clutch. Now, power can be one of two things. It can either be on the throttle, power going this way, or it can be braking power. And in either one of those situations, had I stayed on the throttle, I would have crashed. Had I gone to the brakes, I would have crashed, especially on the motorcycle I was on because it didn't have ABS. So the best situation there, squeeze in the clutch, roll off the throttle, and hopefully you can coast across that bad situation, which in my case is exactly what happened. So even though I had never trained for that road condition, my other training paid off and saved from the crash because I was used to keeping my head and eyes up. I was used to consciously keeping my upper body relaxed, and I knew from that situation not to be on the throttle to kick that rear tire further out. So training is important, and working on the fundamentals of riding is where it's at. The training that I was practicing for those prior to those close calls was the exact same material that's found in the field guide. The fundamentals are where it's at, and practicing and mastering the fundamentals is what's going to keep you upright, even in situations that you can't train for on a parking lot. The skills that are found in guides like this or in instruction classes that you go to are what's going to keep you upright out on the road. So members get access to this at mcrider.com/member. You get access to a digital version. If you want a print copy of this, go to mcrider.com/FGbook and start practicing these skills, or sign yourself up for a training class and start developing and practicing these skills on your own. So you find yourself in a bad situation out on the road. Let's talk about some things you should do when the road surface is bad and a few things that you should not do. Some of the things that you should do are dependent on the situation. One of them is to reduce speed, if possible, before you're on the surface. So in the scenario I told you before, had I seen that black ice on the road before I got to it, my best bet would have been to slow down prior to that while I still had traction, but because I didn't see it until I was on it, that wasn't an option for me. But a lot of times, if you're looking ahead, you can see that situation ahead of time, and you can roll off the throttle or get on the brakes fairly aggressively before you get to the surface. You just want to make sure you're off the brakes by the time you're on the surface. If you can, straighten the motorcycle up. You know, if you're in a very sharp curve, that may not be possible, but in other situations, your best bet is for the motorcycle to be straight up and down, riding in a straight line, you know, with the bike parallel to the road, not leaned over, not, you know, lurching forward because you're heavily on the brakes, just straight up and down, coasting across that bad road surface that you found yourself on. You want to relax your grip and upper body. So the motorcycle is going to try to regain traction. Sometimes the handlebars are going to move. Sometimes you're going to feel the back end of the motorcycle kick out a little bit. The more tension that you've got in your arms and shoulders, the less you're allowing that motorcycle to be able to find its traction and regain its traction to keep you going down the road. You don't want to look down at the surface that you're trying to overcome. You want to look ahead. You want to look where you want the motorcycle to be, and keeping your head and eyes up is the best way to do that. If possible, choose your line through it. So like if you're in a heavy rain situation and you've got a car in front of you that is leaving tracks, you know, through the rain, your best bet is to ride in one of those tracks because you know there is less water in those situations. So if possible, choose your line. You know, if there's gravel on the road and you can see a spot where there's less gravel, choose that line to pass through. That is going to help you also. You know, sometimes standing up on the foot pegs, if you got a motorcycle where you can stand up on it, like an ADV or something like that, it's better to stand up in certain situations, like crossing a board that has fallen in the road or some kind of obstacle in the road that you need to ride over. If you're standing up, it's going to lower the center of gravity of your weight on the motorcycle, because now all your weight is on the foot pegs and it's down low, and it's going to allow the motorcycle to move up and down while your upper body and torso, stays fairly steady. Just use your knees as a shock absorber, allow that motorcycle to move up underneath you, and then once you've crossed over, you can sit back down. Some things that are probably going to make the situation worse: strong brake input. One of our instincts is to get that motorcycle to a stop when we find ourselves in a bad situation, and grabbing the brakes is one of the worst things that you can do to make the situation go worse. So you want to avoid grabbing the brakes. In fact, any abrupt input on the controls of the motorcycle, whether it's grabbing the brakes, abrupt throttle on or off, or abrupt steering input, is not going to benefit you in poor road surface conditions. So you want to be smooth in everything you do, especially when the road surface is less than ideal. But what about a motorcycle with ABS? In conditions where there is some traction, ABS is a lifesaver. And I'm a huge believer in ABS. There are several videos out there that show the difference between a motorcycle with ABS that's attempting to lock the brakes up and a motorcycle that actually locks the brakes up without ABS on a wet road surface. And you can quickly see the advantage of having ABS. It's going to help keep the motorcycle upright. And in those situations, ABS is your best friend. But I can speak from experience that when there is no traction, ABS can kind of be a terrifying thing. So think about how ABS works. You apply the brakes, the ABS module senses that there's a loss of traction, and the way that works is it reduces the clamp down on the caliper to allow the wheel to keep spinning. Well, it does this thousands of times per second, but if there's never any traction, it's never going to apply the brakes. It's going to allow that wheel to keep spinning, keep rolling. The positive to that is probably have a lot better chance of staying upright. The negative to that is if you're on a road surface where there is no traction, so we're talking about ice or a lot of oil on the road, in those situations, it's going to feel like you've got no brakes at all. You can squeeze on that front brake as hard as you want, but that ABS is going to keep that tire from locking up, and a lot of times that means you're going to keep rolling at whatever speed that you're going at, and that can be a heart-pounding moment when that happens. The good news is ABS is potentially going to keep you from a low side or a high side crash. The bad news is you're not slowing down until that motorcycle is able to find some traction. And if it's a situation like riding over a patch of ice, I wouldn't want to ride over the hazard and then arrive at the dry side. Like in my situation, there was a 40-foot patch of ice. I don't want to hit that dry side of it if I've got ABS or not, and I've got the brakes hammered on. I don't want to be in that situation if the bike is out of alignment and then all of a sudden it gets brake input and it tries to slow you down quickly. I would much rather be in a coasting situation where I've got the clutch squeezed in, I'm off the throttle. I allow the motorcycle first to straighten back up, and then if necessary, get on the brakes to get the motorcycle to slow down. But the best way to avoid these situations is always prevention. So that's the reason why one of the biggest tips that I preach here on MCrider is that our best hope in situations like this is to see those hazards before we're on top of them. And that only happens if we're looking ahead and keeping time and space around us. So keep your head and eyes up, look down the road. Keep your head and eyes up and look down the road. It very well could save your life and help you avoid situations just like the ones we talked about today. Till next week, guys, it's Kevin with MCrider, and I'll see you on the road. There's a whole lot more to MCrider than just the weekly videos. Go to mcrider.com/member. You'll get instant access to the forums and the field guide. You get ad-free MCrider videos and a whole lot more. Go to mcrider.com/member for all the details.